Welcome! In this video we're going to learn how to play Metrorunner, the 1 to 5 player competitive cyberpunk board game designed by Stephen Kerr and published by Thunderworks Games. The game is set in futuristic Mirror City, where you'll take on the role of a street-savvy hacker, wheeling and dealing your way from one district to the next on the Metro rail line. If you'd like to learn a bit more about the theme and setting, you can check out my other Metrorunner video, which is linked below. But in this video we're going to focus on the nuts and bolts of how to play. Sorry, make that the semiconductors and holograms of how to play. The winner will be the player who scores the most points, and scoring is done at the very end of the game. Solo players, on the other hand, will be aiming to climb the score chart and possibly beat their personal best in the process. I think the best way to internalise these rules, short of downloading them directly into your neural port, is with some gameplay examples. So in just a moment I'm going to kick off a 2-player game. I won't play a full game, but enough to get you onto the mean streets of Mirror City. All the rules I'm going to cover in my 2-player game apply to all player counts. There are some additional rules and components for solo play, and we'll take a look at those towards the end of this video. When it comes to game setup, the rulebook has you well covered with step-by-step instructions, and I don't think I'd be doing either of us any favours by going over that in excruciating detail. So instead, I'll introduce some game components and give a brief outline of their setup. Of course, there's the game board, which is two-sided, based on the number of players. Player tokens will move clockwise around the metro line to get around Mirror City, which is divided into 5 districts. The 5 colours of these districts, yellow, red, purple, black and blue, will be popping up repeatedly on game components, in this video, and possibly even in your dreams if you play it often enough. Each player gets a character card. We'll be running Omi and Axon. They have a little bit of backstory on the back and a unique hacking ability on the front. Players also get a runner board with a colour matching one of the 5 districts. You can think of that district as your home turf. We'll give Omi the red runner board and Axon the blue one. Runners also get a figure which starts out in their home district, on the hack action space. The colour of your runner board, and therefore your home district, has almost no direct effect on gameplay. It can influence the game setup, namely your starting position and your starting resources, and at the very end of the game it can affect scoring. But there aren't any gameplay mechanics which reference your home district. I really like the fact that so much of your runner board is dedicated to a summary of the game's most important rules. On the left it shows the turn sequence, and on the right a complete description of boosts. And speaking of rule summaries, there's also a double-sided reference card, which is super handy. Between the quick reference and the runner boards, you're unlikely to need the rulebook much beyond your first game. We'll be referring to all of these as we play. Your runner board also shows your starting resources. For example, Omi gets these 3 resource cubes, which I'll take from the supply and put in her storage. She also gets 1 credit, which I'll put, somewhere. And finally, she gets a couple of job cards, which is what that briefcase icon stands for. The one on the left is red and marked with an S, so it represents the red starting card. The game has just 1 starting card of each colour, and it's a somewhat easier job than most, which is ideal for the hapless neophyte that you start the game as. The other job card is an ordinary one, drawn at random from the job deck. Of course, in a real game you'll keep your hand of cards concealed, but for this video I'll keep them face up. Now that we've acquired our first resource cubes and job cards, it's a good moment to draw your attention to one of the most important rules in the game, which is that you have a hand size limit of 5 cards and a resource limit of 10 cubes. If you go over your limit, you have to discard the excess at the end of your turn. And if you fail to notice that you've gone over your limit, it's going to be extra embarrassing because it's printed right there on your runner board. In fact, the third and final step in the turn sequence is politely entitled cleanup, but roughly translated it means, for the love of God, don't go over your resource limits. The runner boards also have a couple of hack upgrade slots. At the start of the game, the padlock icon tells you that they're off limits, but as you progress along the influence track at the bottom of the board, you'll unlock the upgrades. First the triangular alpha upgrade, then the beta upgrade. And that's it for the runner boards, for now. The only parts we haven't looked at yet are the slots at the bottom, which is where we'll tuck completed job cards. In the centre of the game board we have a couple of decks of network cards and a random grid of panop tiles. We'll look at these when one of our runners hacks the network. Above the board is the shuffled deck of job cards with 4 cards on display. This is called the offer, and players will draft job cards from here to their hand. You can also draw cards directly from the top of the deck, if you're feeling lucky. One important rule to remember is that there's no discard pile for job cards. If you ever need to discard a job card, you place it face down at the bottom of the job deck. Above that we have the 4 contract cards with district tokens placed on them at random. In a nutshell, this is a set collection feature, because if you manage to create a set of completed job cards which match the colours on a contract card, you'll score points for the contract at the end of the game. Omi is going to kick things off, so we'll give her the first player marker. This marker never changes hands, it's just a reminder of who took the first turn. At the end of the game, we'll make sure that Axon gets the very last turn. That way all players will get an equal number of turns. Okay, let's get this game started. It's Omi's turn, and her runner board has a list of the 3 steps which make up every turn. 1. Move, 2. Take an action, and 3. Clean up. For the move step, she can move 1 or 2 empty spaces for free. If there's another runner in front of you, you simply jump over them, and their space doesn't count towards your movement. For example, if there were a purple runner in this space, Omi might choose to move forward 2 spaces and end up here. Of course, in our game, the line ahead is all clear. If she wants to move more than 2 spaces, she can discard resource cubes or one of her job cards to do so. We'll definitely see an example of that later in the game, but let's keep it simple for now and choose between moving 1 or 2 spaces. Each space has an icon which represents an action you can take from that location. We'll learn about these actions gradually as we play the game, but for now Omi decides to move forward 1 space, and that's the end of the move step. Step 2 is to take 1 action. And as it says on the turn sequence, there's always a choice to be made at this point. She can either take the action shown on her space, called the location action, or she can take a district action instead. Let's take a look at the location action first. She's currently on top of the contact agents action, which would enable her to gain 1 or more resource cubes. The white cube in this icon represents a resource of any colour, and this action gives the runner 1, 2 or 3 resource cubes depending on their position on the notoriety track. These markings along the bottom of the track indicate how many cubes you gain when performing the contact agents action. So Omi gets just 1 cube since she's about as notorious as a cute fluffy kitten. For now you can pretty much ignore all the numbers along the top and bottom of these tracks since they're only used for end of game scoring. So that's the contact agents action in a nutshell. Of course Omi doesn't have to choose that action, she could perform one of the district actions instead. But I'm not going to look at those just yet because I don't want this first turn of the game to go on for half an hour. So she takes the contact agents action and she'll grab a yellow cube from the supply. The final step in her turn is clean up, and of course she's well below the maximum of 5 cards and 10 cubes, so there's nothing to do here, and that's the end of her turn. And at last Axon gets to take his turn. Step 1 is to move, and he's going to move a couple of spaces so that he lands on the acquire gigs action. Step 2 is to perform an action, and as always he can choose between the icon he's standing on, called the location action, and one of the 2 district actions. In this case the location action is acquire gigs. That would enable him to draw a couple of new job cards, and we'll look at that shortly. But first let's check out the district actions. There are 2 to choose from, and they're essentially the same for every district. They're described in the turn sequence, which is on every runner board. They're also represented by a couple of icons below each district's name on the game board. The icons are separated by a /, reminding you that you can only perform one of them on your turn. The first district action is to gain 1 resource cube. That cube matches the colour of the district you're visiting. Axon is currently on the border between the blue district and the yellow district. So if he chooses that action, he'll gain his choice of either a blue or a yellow resource cube from the supply. The second district action is to complete a job in the current district. Unsurprisingly, jobs can only be completed when you're in the district shown on the card. For example, this job card can only be completed when the runner is in the purple district, the Heights. Before deciding what Axon should do, there's one last thing I'll point out about district actions. On the game board, you'll notice a space bordered by a dotted line just below the action icons. As the game progresses, these spaces may start to accumulate one or more resource cubes, like this. When a player performs either of the two district actions we just looked at, they also get to plunder the district's cache of resource cubes, if there are any. That's shown on the turn sequence, but just be aware that it applies to either of the district actions, not just the second one. Returning to our game, let's say that Axon chooses the location action, which is acquire gigs. The description says draw 2 job cards. These cards may be from the offer, the top of the deck, or one from each. Pretty straightforward. He grabs 1 job card from the offer and 1 from the deck. Notice that the job card on the left has a question mark where the job's district is normally displayed. It's referred to as a freelance job. This means that the job can be completed in any district. Anytime a player has just ransacked the offer like this, it gets refilled, so that it always has 4 face-up cards. Just note that you're not allowed to refill it until after you've finished drawing your job cards. With his action complete, and nothing needed in the cleanup step, Axon's turn is over. I'll skip forward a few turns so that the game has progressed a bit further, and now the runners have collected a few more job cards and resource cubes. It's now Omi's turn, and she's keen to try completing her first job. She has a decent selection of job cards in her hand, but sadly not many resource cubes. I think her best bet is this divert wire transfer job, because she has the resource cubes needed to pay for it. The problem is, she needs to reach Market Square, the yellow district, to complete the job. And that's a long way round on the metro line. So she decides to use the car service boost, which is described on her runner board. It says, for your move, you may move to any open location, and the cost of 1 credit is shown on the left. She only has 1 credit, so that cleans her out. But it does get her to Market Square. For her action, she'll obviously complete a job. The cost of this job is 2 yellow and 1 purple resource, so she'll return those cubes to the supply. With the job complete, it's time for the rewards, which are shown as a row of icons near the bottom of the card. You'll find that component rewards, like cards and cubes, are shown on the left, and track rewards, like influence and notoriety, are on the right. All the reward icons are explained on the reference card. In this case, Omi gains 1 new job card and advances 1 space on the influence track. Next, we get to tuck the completed job card underneath her runner board in one of these 3 slots. Any slot is allowed, provided you don't go over the maximum of 3 cards per slot, and once you place a card in a slot, it can never be moved. In this case, I think I'll choose the leftmost slot, and I'll make sure the bottom section of the job card is visible. On the right, we can see that this will earn me 2 points at the very end of the game, and on the left is a reminder of which district the job belongs to. That's also going to be relevant at the end of the game when we score contracts. More on that later. And finally, in the middle of the card, you'll sometimes gain an ongoing ability. There are several different ongoing abilities in the game, and they're all described on the reference card. Omi's new ability means that from now on, every time she gains 1 or more yellow resource cubes, she also gains 1 extra yellow cube. Nice! We'll come back to ongoing abilities later, but for now I'll just point out the most important rule, which is that you can only use each ability once per action. We've almost finished with this job, but there's one more step to go. Each slot on the runner board has a slot bonus, which you gain every time you add a newly completed job card to the slot. In this case, it lets Omi advance 1 space on the influence track, so I'll move her tracker token again. Notice that she has just reached a hack upgrade, so I get to flip the alpha hack token on her runner board. That will be relevant later when Omi tries hacking the network. And that's the end of Omi's complete jobs action. If there had been any resource cubes stashed here at the market square, then she would have gained those as well, but sadly there are none. And with no cleanup needed, that's the end of her turn. It's now Axon's turn, and he's going to start by moving 1 space on the metro. The location action he lands on is the hack action. Since we haven't tried that yet, let's ignore the district actions and try hacking the network. If you watched my earlier video, you'll already have a pretty good idea of how this works, but in this video I'm not going to assume any prior knowledge. The network in the centre of the board consists of 9 panop tiles in a 3x3 grid. Your goal is to manipulate the tiles to form a continuous connection between various nodes. Nodes are imaginary points around the outside edge of the network. The particular nodes you're trying to connect will depend on which network card you're trying to fulfill, and there are always 2 network cards to choose from. Let's take Axon through the various steps of hacking the network. At the very start of your hack action, you can optionally discard a network card that you don't like the look of by moving it to the bottom of its deck to reveal a new card. This is called cycling a network card, and I think I'll cycle the network card on the left. Step 2 is to declare which network card you're attempting to complete. In this case, I think I'll try the new card on the left. Let's take a closer look. The network diagram always has 4 nodes around the outside edge. The 2 green circular nodes are called core hack nodes, and they're by far the most important, because unless you connect them, the entire hack action will fail and you'll receive no rewards. The other 2 nodes are called bonus hacks. The blue triangle is called the alpha node, and the purple diamond is the beta node. You can only attempt to use those nodes if you've unlocked the corresponding alpha and beta hacking abilities on your runner board, which Axon hasn't. Having chosen a network card, it's on to step 3, manipulate the panop tiles. Manipulations are shown here on the reference card. You can rotate a tile 90 degrees in either direction. You can swap 2 orthogonally adjacent tiles. You can shift an entire row or column of tiles, like this. And your character card includes 1 more unique manipulation. That still counts as a manipulation, and you can only use it once per hack. Each time you hack the network, you get 2 manipulations for free. If you want to perform additional manipulations, then they'll cost you 1 resource cube each. You can also discard one of your job cards to pay for a manipulation, but you can only do that once per hack. So let's see how we get on. For my first manipulation, I'll swap these 2 adjacent tiles. And for my second, I'll rotate the middle tile 90 degrees. So that's my 2 free manipulations used up, and so far I haven't managed to connect the core hack nodes. If I wanted to end my hack here, I could. There's no penalty for failing a hack, but no rewards either. In this case, I'd like to keep going because I only need 1 more manipulation to succeed. I could pay for it by discarding one of Axon's resource cubes. Any colour would do, but he doesn't have very many, so I think I'll discard one of his job cards instead. That gets returned to the bottom of the job deck. So now I can rotate this tile 90 degrees. And the hack succeeds. Axon gains these rewards shown on the network card. +1 notoriety, 1 credit, and 1 resource cube of any colour. Not bad. Let's apply those now so we don't forget. These other rewards at the very bottom of the network card only apply to the bonus hacks. As it happens, we did connect both the alpha and beta nodes to the network, but sadly we don't get either of those rewards because Axon hasn't unlocked those hacking abilities yet. Never mind, that was still a successful hack. Next we flip the network card we used and place a couple of new resource cubes on the board, according to the icons. In this case we place a blue cube in Market Square and another in the Heights. These are called district assets and they get placed inside the dotted line. Finally, we put the used network card in a discard pile off to one side. If one of the decks ever runs out, you can shuffle the discard pile to make a new deck. And that's the end of Axon's hack action. We've now touched on almost all the rules for hacking, but there's one component we haven't looked at yet, the brute force token. You can gain these by completing certain jobs, and they can help you with a hack action. Simply place one on top of an existing panop tile, as a free action, to temporarily improve the network. But there are several important limitations when using one. First, you can never place one on top of the skull tile. Secondly, you can only use 1 brute force token per hack. And finally, these tokens are single use, so you'll return it to the supply after the hack action is completed. With Axon's turn finished, let's fast forward the game by a few more turns, so that we can look at some new gameplay situations. It's now Omi's turn and she'll start with her movement. She'd quite like to reach this space, but it's 3 spaces away. As mentioned, she can pay for additional movement by spending resource cubes, and this is shown on the reference card. She can also discard one job card in place of a resource cube, but this can only be done once for the entire move. In this case, I think I'll discard one of her job cards. She decides to perform the location action, which is contact agents. She's managed to climb the notoriety track a bit, so she gains 2 resource cubes with her choice of colours. In terms of choosing which colours to take, let's consider a couple of possibilities. Suppose she decided to gain 2 yellow cubes. Thanks to this ongoing ability, on a completed job card, she would also gain 1 additional yellow cube. That's a perfectly good option, but let's do something else instead. She's going to take 1 yellow and 1 blue cube for her contact action. And of course this also grants her an extra yellow cube thanks to her ongoing ability. But she also has another ongoing ability which grants her an additional blue cube. So she makes off with 4 cubes altogether. Not bad for an afternoon's work. That's the end of Omi's action, so now it's on to the cleanup step. She currently has 11 resource cubes, so she'll need to discard one of them. Let's say a black one. Now it's Axon's turn. He'd like to complete this tracking job, so let's see if he can manage it. He'll need to reach the waterfront district, which is 4 spaces away. Of course he gets 2 points of movement for free, and he decides to pay for the rest by discarding 1 resource cube and 1 job card. Then he takes the completed job action. This job normally costs 2 blue and 1 red cube, but Axon has an ongoing ability which lets him pay 1 less blue cube every time he completes a job. So the actual cost is only 1 blue and 1 red. Axon doesn't actually have either of those colours right now. Fortunately, he has another ongoing ability which lets him spend up to 1 black cube in place of some other colour. So he spends a black cube and treats it as if it were blue. I'll just pop that on the card to help me keep track of what I've paid. That's a super useful ability, but do remember that it can only be used once per action. So now he has just 1 red cube to go. In situations like this, where you're short by just 1 resource cube, you're allowed to discard one of your other job cards in place of the missing cube. So Axon discards this one, returning it to the bottom of the job deck. And that's enough to complete the job. Discarding one of your job cards in place of a resource cube is a useful technique, which is shown on the quick reference. We've seen it used throughout this video, when completing jobs like this one, when paying for extra movement, and when hacking the network. Just remember that you can only do this once per action, or once per movement. With the job complete, let's return any spent cubes to the supply and collect Axon's rewards. He gets 1 job card and +1 influence. And of course I'll tuck the completed job card under his runner board. This immediately grants him a new ongoing ability. Every time he gains 1 or more blue resource cubes, he gets 1 bonus cube. Next he gains the slot bonus, which gives him a choice of either 1 credit or 2 resource cubes. I think I'll take the cubes, let's say 1 blue and 1 black. This actually triggers the ongoing ability which he just acquired, so he gets a bonus blue cube. Nice. And finally, because Axon performed a district action on the waterfront, he gains the cache of resource cubes on that district. And with no cleanup needed, that's the end of his turn. At this point, we've seen gameplay examples which utilise most of the essential rules. I'll just point out that there are 4 boost abilities printed on your runner board, and we've only looked at the first one. I'll leave you to explore the other 3 boosts on your own, but just keep in mind that boosts can only be used on your turn. And with that, we're about ready to bring this demonstration game to a close. Let's see how the game ends. There are 3 different events which can trigger the end of the game. Firstly, a runner might cross the end game line on the notoriety or influence track. Secondly, a runner might reach their maximum of 9 completed job cards, filling up all their slots. And thirdly, the job deck might run out of cards. Any one of these events will trigger the end of the game, but note that they won't end the game immediately. There are 2 more factors to consider after the end game is triggered. Firstly, runners always get an equal number of turns. The Start Player token, which was assigned during game setup, will help you keep track of who took the first turn. And there's one more rule which you should be careful not to overlook. Even after the endgame has triggered and everyone has had an equal number of turns, you play one more bonus round. In practice, that means that even if the endgame catches you off guard, you'll have at least one turn to finish off your devious plans. Let's return to our demo game to see how this might play out. I've fast forwarded the game again, and now it's Omi's turn. She moves 2 spaces on the metro line, then decides to complete this job. It's a freelance job, so she can complete it from any district. She pays the costs shown on the card and then collects the job rewards, 1 credit and +1 on the influence track. Notice that this takes her influence marker across the endgame line. Omi finishes her turn by tucking the completed job card under her runner board. She chooses the leftmost slot, which advances her another space on the influence track. Also, notice that Omi is on the border between the Heights and South Side, and there are some district assets in South Side. Her freelance job card can be completed in either district, so let's say it was completed in South Side so that she can collect those cubes. And with no cleanup needed, her turn ends. Now that the end game has been triggered, we'll check the Start Player token. Omi has it, so Axon will take his turn to balance out the number of turns. He moves forward on the metro line and manages to collect a few more resource cubes. Also, because the game is going to end soon, he decides to spend his last 2 credits on the viral marketing boost. That lets him advance either his influence or his notoriety, whichever is lower. In this case, his influence is lower. Increasing the influence like that will earn him more points at the end of the game. And his turn ends. Now that all players have had an equal number of turns, it's time for the bonus round. In other words, Omi gets one last turn and then Axon gets his final turn. I won't get bogged down on the details, but obviously it's a great opportunity to resolve any unfinished business. After the bonus round, it's time to total everyone's score. At the end of the game, there are 5 ways of scoring points. For the most part, they're pretty straightforward, and they're all listed on the reference card, so you don't need to memorize them. Let's see what Omi scored. Every job card has a point value in the bottom right corner, so we total those. Next, we check for completed contracts. For example, to complete this surveillance contract, a runner needs to have completed a yellow job and a blue job and placed them in the same slot beneath their runner board. In Omi's case, she has 1 yellow and 1 freelance job in the same slot, and she can treat the freelance job as a wildcard of any colour, in this case blue. So Omi fulfills that contract and scores 3 points. Contracts are available to all players, so Axon is free to fulfill the same contract if he can. Omi also manages to fulfill the military contract, since she has a slot containing a blue, red and a purple card. As you can see, the order of cards doesn't matter, and that gains her 5 more points. If you're unsure about scoring contracts, just check page 18 of the rulebook for some additional clarifications. For example, each slot on your player board can only fulfill a single contract. Next, Omi gains 14 points for her final position on the influence track, and 5 points for the notoriety track. Not bad. Note that some spaces on the influence and notoriety tracks have an icon but no point value, in which case you score the previous space instead. Next, we score district majority. This awards bonus points to the runner who managed to complete the most jobs matching their home district. In our game, Omi has been playing with the red runner board, so her home district is downtown. And she's only managed to complete 1 red job card. Note that her freelance job is not counted as a red card when scoring district majority. Axon's home district is blue, the waterfront, and since he managed to complete more home district jobs than Omi did, he wins the district majority. That scores him 5 points, and Omi gets 0. In some games there may be a tie, in which case the tied runners get 2 points each. And finally, runners may score some points for their leftover resources. For every 5 unused game components you get 1 point. Omi has 4 resource cubes and 1 credit, so 5 components altogether, which earns her 1 point. If she had any brute force tokens or unused job cards, those would have counted too. And that's it for scoring. Omi's final score is 45, and she managed to beat Axon, who barely managed to scrape together 36 points. In case of a tie, there are some tiebreakers listed on page 19 of the rulebook. Before wrapping up, let's take a quick look at the rules for solo mode. As a solo runner, you'll play by all the same rules which we've looked at throughout this video. But you'll also have to contend with a rogue AI, which is quite different from a human player. The AI doesn't use regular components like a runner board, and it doesn't complete jobs, collect resource cubes, or even score points. Instead, it has these two tokens, which will move around the metro line, and it will also take actions which change the state of the game. To do this, it has a deck of 20 AI cards, and we also keep track of its influence and notoriety. Let's see how this plays out. Following his defeat, Axon is taking a break, and Omi is about to play her first solo game. She starts in her home district, which is downtown, and the two rogue tokens start in the adjacent districts, Market Square and the Heights. I'll use the yellow tokens to track the AI's influence and notoriety, but any colour is fine. And the AI deck gets shuffled and placed face down. Omi takes the first turn and collects a resource cube. With her turn finished, we reveal the top card of the AI deck. There are some new icons here which are explained on page 22 of the rulebook. At the top we have the movement action. In this case we move the gold token 3 spaces and the silver token 4 spaces. On some cards you'll see a movement action like this, which means that you immediately move the tokens to the indicated spaces in front of and behind your own runner token. At the bottom of the card we have 2 sets of actions, and we only ever perform one of these, based on whoever is furthest ahead on the notoriety track. If the AI is ahead, then perform the actions on the left, and if you're ahead, perform the actions on the right. In our game, Omi and the AI have equal notoriety, so we use the left side of the card. It tells us to discard the second card from the job offer. And increase the AI's influence by 1. And that's the end of the AI's turn. To get familiar with what the other action icons mean, it's best to play the game and refer to the rulebook when necessary. Omi and the AI will continue taking turns this way until eventually the game ends. The AI doesn't score any points, but Omi can compare her final score to the chart in the rulebook to see how well she did. The only difference to scoring is the district majority bonus. In a multiplayer game, that goes to the player who completed the most home district jobs, but of course that wouldn't make sense in a solo game. Instead, the rulebook gives you an alternative scoring method, namely 1 extra point for each home district job. And with that, we've reached the end of this video. You should now have a bit more confidence to take on your friends, or the AI, as a hacker on the streets of Mirror City. Thanks for watching, and good luck with your own adventures.